This Airlift Tanker Association Walk of Fame is dedicated to mobility airmen and the mission they supported. Mobility airmen made up of great leaders, heroes, from aviators to mission specialists to ground personnel. This year's dedication is no different as we induct Colonel Earl B. Young, who incidentally is 101 years old. Colonel Young first served in the United States Army Air Corps, later transitioning to the United States Air Force, where he worked with many of the great generals like Arnold, Spotts, George, Cooter, and Smith, just to name a few. In 1951, as the first 18th Air Force commander, Colonel Young led the Air Force by organizing for worldwide air mobility operations. I was honored to interview Colonel Young for his Hall of Fame induction, so we could learn from this mobility pioneer in his own words. Born in Wyoming?
Born in Casper.
Casper, Wyoming.
Casper, Wyoming, yeah.
Quite a cold climate.
It was a wild and woolly town in those days. My dad was running a restaurant, the Rhinoceros Cafe and Bar. All cafes had bars in Casper. Not all bars had cafes.
You enlisted in the Army Air Corps in 1936?
1936. Well, it took a little while to get that done because in order to become a flying cadet, I had to take a few exams, and I passed all the exams. I got a letter from the AG saying that I'd passed, I was eligible, and I was on the list, and they'd give me a call.
Sir, you weren't among the first to be called. How did that work?
First, West Point grads, and then people with some military, and then some people with college grads, and some people with some college, and here I was an other. I had 1 year of college and no military. Along comes a letter. It's saying we reached the bottom of the stack, and here you were, and if you still want to become a flying cadet, go on out to March Field, and if you can pass your physical, then you can come on down to Randolph and fly. But I passed it, and then I went on down to Randolph and spent a year as a cadet.
So you got your pilot's wing in, as a second lieutenant in 1937, roughly.
Yeah, that was a good experience too. When we first went in, of course, we were flying cadets in the Army.
Colonel Young's early flying career took him to Kelly Field, Texas, where he trained on Keystone bombers and then moved to the 36th Pursuit Squadron, part of the 8th Pursuit Group at Langley, Virginia, flying the P-6 and the PB-2 aircraft. He stayed in the 8th Pursuit Group as it moved to Mitchell Field, Long Island, New York, flying P-40s. In 1941, he opened and commanded the Boston Information Center, part of the World War II Homeland Defense System, monitoring the East Coast sea and airspace for enemy aircraft and submarines.
So we were able to keep track of every airplane on the East Coast from this Boston Information Center.
In 1942, Colonel Young became the Deputy Chief of Operations, Headquarters, 1st Air Force, where he worked to get units ready for deployment to support World War II. His efforts were instrumental in garnering supplies for the deploying units. During World War II, he was part of the 321st Bombardment Group flying B-25 Mitchell bombers from Corsica and Bimini in Italy, interrupting German supply routes in the Brenner Pass.
Of course, the most dangerous missions were over the Brenner Pass, a pass from Italy to Germany, where the Germans were trying to bring in supplies to their army that was in Italy, and we were kind of trying to make it difficult for them to do that. So we would bomb their railroad track and bomb the bridges in the pass all the way down from Germany and on in. The airplane wouldn't go very high. We couldn't use oxygen. Several of the missions airplanes got shot up. The most exciting one, I suppose, I had was one where they shot an engine up, and one of the two upright tails got knocked off. But the full crew, most of who were shot up one way or the other. So I had a choice of leaving the thing hanging up there and bailing, or or taking it home. I decided to take the thing home. So I took it on home. They were ready for me at the other end. They were take it in, land it, and get out of there. That saved all the crew.
After the war, Colonel Young started impacting our mobility air forces in a major way.
After World War II, I decided to get out of the combat outfits, so I signed up for ATC. So I became the head of the policy and plans for the ATC. It turned out to be a pretty interesting time for ATC. First place, the guys who had been running ATC, of course, back in their own bailiwick, and they wanted people to use civilian airlines and not military. One of my jobs was to keep that from happening. It took a lot of writing. We worked up what we called a 400-man plan, where we kept people on the ground in half a dozen different airfields in order that this airline could proceed through it, which kept them going for until they could get their own people trained in. After I was assigned as the plans and policy, they decided one day to give me a job of combining the Navy Air with the ATC. They called me special assistant to the commanding general, gave me a desk in his office so I wouldn't be bothered by any stray jobs that might come along, and I was to combine the two services. We got the captain command of the Navy Air Transport Service and got him to give us a list of all his assets and combine the travel, leaving the Navy with enough airplanes to service their boats from shore to ship and that sort of stuff. We thought it would be a good thing to change the name from ATC to Military Air Transport Service, and so we would. That's how MATS was born.
Why was it called service and not command?
To keep from hurting the feelings of the Navy as much as anything.
So following your Pentagon tour, you transitioned ATC to MATS. You really got into mobility business by standing up 18th Air Force.
I went to the Air Force chief. I told him that I wanted out and told him why I wanted out. And he sent me down to Langley to see Tactical Air Command. They sent me to Donaldson Air Force Base, where I reopened the base as half a dozen other bases were reopening to support the Korean effort. One of the jobs, establishing the 18th Air Force. 18th Air Force was originally 18th Air Force Troop Carrier. It was not simply worldwide the way it is now. All we had while I was command was troop carriers that were reactivated and come to Donaldson to be re-equipped and trained. And some of them were, of course, established at other bases, but most of them came to Donaldson. And we trained them and got them out of there. After a short while, a couple of months, they sent in a two-star general. I told him that, I told Welser, General Welser, when he brought me in, that I took over the 18th Air Force and handled it for a couple of months until it was down to the point where even a major general could handle it. And he thought that was probably all right. So, and then the major general and I took over as his exec and stayed there until about the end of the year, and then I went over to Turkey.
Sir, what type of aircraft did 18th Air Force have?
C-123s, of course some C-47s, C-46s, the boxcars, C-82. They were boxcars. They were the first airplanes that we had that had nose wheels instead of tail wheels. So the first transport we had were the cargo laid flat. Most airplanes was in this, like the C-47, where it was the tail wheel, and everything you put in it slides to the tail. So These airplanes were great to be, everything was level in them.
Sir, could you provide additional details about 18th Air Force when you stood it up?
I say it was a troop carrier outfit altogether. We activated all of half a dozen different squadrons and trained them up to go to Korea. After 6 months or so, we had all the troop carrier airplanes we could use, so we started looking around while I was still with Bob Douglas in the 18th for other missions. And we started branching out a little bit as to carry supplies and people, both in the theater and in the United States. I got pretty active in air transport business. That kept up for about 7 years, and all of a sudden, 18 suddenly came up against a restriction that I had put in the system when I was organizing military air transport service, where MATS would be the only military outfit flying interstate kinds of traffic. And the 18th Air Force came afoul of that law. 18th was promptly deactivated, and the airplanes turned over, some of them the ATC or MATS, and some of them back to TAC to use for their tactical air in the troop carriers. But 18th was out. And 18th stayed inactive then for several years before Welser reorganized it.
Colonel Earl B. Young's career was broad-ranging and continues to impact mobility air forces. In ATC, he defended the need for mobility air forces at the end of World War II. He combined naval and air assets to create the Military Air Transport Service. Shortly after the War Department transitioned to the Department of Defense and the Air Force became a separate service, Colonel Young was tasked with standing up and commanding 18th Air Force, a consolidation of all transportation assets into a single organization with the mission of providing worldwide air transportation to the DoD. For his outstanding mobility achievements, the Airlift Tanker Association is proud to induct Colonel Earl B. Young into the 2014 Airlift Tanker Association Hall of Fame. What did you do for your 100th birthday?
Out at the airport here, we have what they call a Tiger flight, and they have a little airplane, it's a little low-wing monoplane, and I was flying it around just so I knew what I was doing. Flew it for a half hour or so.
Tell us a little bit about your friend, who that is.
Yeah, this is a Little Bit. That's the only name that the family here gave him. He came to the door, and I don't know, probably the better part of a year ago, and adopted the family here. If I'd known I was going to live so long, I'd taken better care of us.